Hey, Dan, here you go.
Ooh, and what have we got here? Party hat, streamers, and
That's the spirit. Happy Indigenous Peoples Day.
oh yeah, that's right. It's June 21st. Happy Indigenous People Day to you, Niigaan. Hey, aren't you gonna put on some of this party stuff too? I mean, aren't we supposed to be celebrating together?
In fact, I celebrate every day just by being alive.
Okay, that's an excellent point, but you're wearing a Batman shirt.
Yes, and I'm Indigenous.
Okay, but isn't this the day that's supposed to be about education, honoring treaties, recognizing that Manitoba was founded by Indigenous communities, contributions by leaders like Louis Riel and Chief Peguis? How about the fact that some of the most exciting economic projects in Winnipeg's future will be created and operated by Indigenous peoples?
Yeah. It's all that and more. But June 21st, it's an important day. It's just that there's lots of other days to wear party hats and use streamers and talk about Indigenous communities too.
So you're saying I should wear this party stuff every day then?
Not quite, but you could wear this Superman shirt alongside my Batman one.
Whoa, hang on. Isn't the story of Superman that he was born in a far off land and was sent to Earth to save the local people who can't save themselves? And isn't the story about Batman that he's a millionaire who throws poor and marginalized people in prison while maintaining the status quo in society?
I don't like this dress up game anymore. Put that party hat back on, Dan.
All right.
The Winnipeg Free Press proudly presents, in partnership with CJNU 93.7 FM, Niigaan and the Lone Ranger. Here are your hosts, Niigaan Sinclair and Dan the Lone Ranger Lett.
Welcome back, everybody. As the intro to today's episode of Niigaan and the Lone Ranger indicates, we are recording this on June the 21st.
Indigenous Peoples Day.
Indigenous Peoples Day. Apparently a day for, you got to go to party stuff or the dollar store and, raid those or not.
Go to an education session is really
yeah. So, and tell me honestly, if I show up at the Forks for National Indigenous Day wearing a pointy party hat, what's the over-under on me getting out of the Forks alive?
Well, first off, if you go today, which is actually National Indigenous Peoples Day, which is a Wednesday, and nobody will be there because the Aboriginal Day Live, the kind of infamous that was run by APTN, they do it on the Saturday before, which kind of defeats the purpose. But anyways, they do it because they want to guarantee an event. And what's happened is, and I think people might have noticed this, or maybe you haven't noticed this, but I'll point it out, is because the government was about 3-4 years ago was in this position of where do we put National the Residential School Survivor Day, Orange Shirt Day. There was a lot of talk of putting that on June 21st. They decided to put it September 30th. And that has taken a lot of the energy out of June 21st. Of course, that's a famous day that was selected in 1990. It's been going now for 33 years. Of people recognizing kind of Indigenous contributions to the country. Not a lot of people recognize that day anymore. There's kind of a bunch of memes on social media and so on, but generally all of the energy of the country focuses on Orange Shirt Day on September 30th.
Yeah, no, I will say, I know that the summer solstice is an important day. Really, it's an important day for Indigenous people. Other than the fact, and this is true, it's my wedding anniversary. So that makes
it that way. We planned it that way.
Yeah.
We said that is the day. That is the day of growth. It's also the longest day of the year.
That's the big joke between my lovely wife and I, is that we were married on the longest day of the year, and then we allow people to draw their own conclusions from that. So. It is like June 21st, but it is true that holidays or special days that are like the second Monday of such and such a month or the third Saturday or whatever tend to accumulate more attention. Like they get more attention, more participation. So, but when you pick a date in the calendar, then you're kind of all over, you run the risk of not being a day, not being a thing.
There's an interesting split that's happened. June 21st is now, a lot of Indigenous peoples are using that for their own kind of ceremony. The powwow circuit's in full energy right now. So if you look on as my social media as a litmus test, there's a lot of really important ceremonies taking place on the 21st. And so it's becoming more of an Indigenous focused day. And the government or Canada or society is really focused a lot on September 30th, good, bad, great, ugly, and that's the kind of way that things are rolling out.
And talk about rolling out, because it's the federal government has found another way of recognizing, and I'm just remember there were good intentions behind all of this, right? So,
well, I mean what happens is that there's often they save these kinds of days for rather important or not so important events. There was an announcement in Ottawa that there will be a new $2 commemorative toonie coin. As once again, the loonie is under threat. I'm sure there's going to be protests across the country because Indigenous peoples are apparently taking over the toonie. And there will be, you will see rolling out any day now, the new $2 commemorative coin. It's actually quite beautiful. It's full
really beautiful. Yeah. Lots of colors and it's amazing.
It's the creation of 3 Indigenous artists, all female, representing First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. It's a really nice coin, but I'm sure people will remember this Indigenous Peoples Day forever because of the creation of this. That's my glass half full way of seeing. And on that note,
on to harder news. So you and I found a similar fascination in the ongoing story of what appears to be the ritual sacrifice of a federal cabinet minister for a story of unusual proportions and configuration. So why don't you give us the background on
There is 2 forces when it comes to justice in the country. There is Correctional Services Canada, who, upon someone being found guilty in a federal prison, they're sent there. Correctional Services Canada makes determinations on where they will go, what facility they will head to, what kind of services they'll be undergoing during their time in prison. And then there's this other part of the justice system, which is the Department of Justice federally, which is generally the justice minister makes the decision of big macro decisions across the country. And those 2 worlds are not supposed to come together. Right. That's not the way the system works. But when you get a prisoner with the kind of legacy that Paul Bernardo, famous serial killer of young women, everyone in Canada has heard of. There was a really great story that was coming out from the Toronto Star. Everybody knows 2 prisoners in the country, Paul Bernardo and Robert Pickton. And those 2 individuals are kind of the ways in which Canada has rolled out over time. So you can't really say either one of those names in any way without a real visceral response from Canadians. And so when news came out that Paul Bernardo had been transferred from a maximum security prison to a medium security prison, the media, a lot driven by CBC and the Globe and Mail and so on, went right to Justice Minister Mendicino and said, "What the heck's going on? When did you know this is happening?" Public Safety Minister Marco Mendicino, and then he said, first off, 2 things. One is, I don't know. I didn't know this was going to happen. And second is, this is terrible that this is happening. Both of those things have led to a whole bunch of questions of who knew what, where. It seems like that would be a major public relations nightmare. And second is that the minister should not be making comments on decisions on Correctional Services Canada.
Okay, so as you well know, criminal justice, and particularly in the context of wrongful convictions, but I've spent my entire career studying the machinations of the criminal justice system in this country and the prison system. I've been to more prisons in this country than I care to really fully disclose. So here's first of all my general take. Number one is that like Paul Bernardo is a lightning rod, and he has been classified as a dangerous offender. Theoretically, could he get out of prison at some point? Yes. The reality is that once you're declared a dangerous offender, that is the only time in the Canadian correctional system where you can be fairly confident that you will spend the rest of your natural life in prison. Bernardo is such a dark and infamous figure that anything that attaches to his name is likely to be caught up in the maelstrom of politics and public opinion and whatever. So Mendocino, you're right. Mendocino said, I didn't know this was happening. Fact is, the Correctional Service does not consult nor notify federal cabinet ministers about decisions it makes on the movement of prisoners, and for a very good reason. There is no legal or administrative way for Mendocino to influence the outcome of these things, of a decision to transfer. Okay, fair enough. Should he have known that it was going to happen at the very least, so he could have figured out something better to say?
Some strategy or some kind of response. And what the wrinkle in that story is that the Prime Minister's office apparently knew that this was coming 3 months ago, which tells you that the Prime Minister's office seems to be controlling more information when it comes to public safety, justice, Paul Bernardo, than Marco Mendocino's office. Right. And so that tells you that there is a kind of micromanagement in the Prime Minister's office that is eerily reminiscent of what people criticized about Stephen Harper, which is that Stephen Harper controlled, micromanaged his own government.
Yeah.
Trudeau said that he would be different. Seems like the evidence of this would be that he's controlling a lot of information.
Yeah. The second thing that Mendocino said, and which I think sealed his fate, and as we speak right now, there are reports circulating in the national media that Prime Minister Trudeau is going to trigger a cabinet shuffle over the summer, and that he's either going to kick Mendocino out of cabinet altogether or move him to a less contentious portfolio. I think, I can't really support that decision because the minister in this case didn't really do anything wrong. At the core of the story is a profound misunderstanding about what medium security is in the Canadian penal system. And, I don't think there's any good excuse for any national media organization not to understand that medium security is not what it has been implied. It is not less secure than a maximum security prison. Maximum and supermax prisons and units within prisons are really places where prisoners can be kept away from other prisoners, away from other members, like people who are resident of the supermax or max facility, but only for a short period of time. It's not meant to be the last place that they ever go. A medium security prison in proper context, what you would think of is your normal, lock secure, 40-foot high stone walls, kind of prison. I've been in 4 different medium security prisons, and I can tell you that they are exactly what you would want them to be. If you're big on crime and punishment, they are awful, frightening, often medieval looking places. So, and this, so I think in the rush to condemn Marco Mendocino, how could the national media not include that important bit of information,
or like educate the public on what medium and maximum is? Because the fact is, I think Canadians hear the word medium, they think this is Shangri-La, or I think back to the story involving the murders in Saskatchewan and the ways in which the media, our colleagues, and lots of them who I otherwise respect, classify what Indigenous run facilities are when it comes to the justice system as kinds of these Shangri-La vacation spots that somehow are not on par with other correctional facilities across the country. When Indigenous peoples are running those facilities, they are ethical and they have guidelines and policies, and in many cases look very similar to prisons, but are being run in not such a way that is so retributive or based in violence. Violence that addresses other violence just turns out more violence.
Yeah,
that Indigenous peoples have been trying to do that for years, and so I'm thinking about the ways in which we don't tell a good story of prisons in this country generally.
Yeah, no, you're right. As soon as this story started raging too, I was contacted by. I have many sources in the federal correctional system, in law enforcement, in criminal justice, and a number of people made the same observation, which is like, even though Paul Bernardo is going to a security with a slightly lower or a prison with a slightly lower security classification, because of the kind of crimes that he committed, he raped and molested and murdered teenage girls. Because of that, he is never destined to move freely among the general population of any prison. He is technically known in prison culture as a skinner. And the end result is that he will be under constant threat to be harmed or possibly killed by other prisoners.
And, although I think any smart prison, maximum, minimum, medium, or any prison would not include him in the general population. But in this case, if he were to be involved with the general population, he's actually in more danger now.
Well, there's
the pound of flesh, they may get it.
Yeah. If you really want the world to be rid of Paul Bernardo, you should want him transferred to Gen Pop in a medium security prison. And then unfortunately, the normal natural course of culture there will take care of it. But today, we are not, our feature interview could not be really farther from the topics that we've been discussing.
I feel we may get a email from Elizabeth going, "What a lead-in to my interview."
What WTF, Niigaan and Dan? So anyways, why don't you, we've partly done the reveal. Why don't you do the rest of the reveal?
Well, we are very privileged to have, a long-standing parliamentarian, someone with a resume that almost speaks for itself. I think every Canadian knows the name Elizabeth May. While born in Connecticut, has now become a major force in Canadian politics as a Canadian, has been involved with the Sierra Club and national environmental organizations. To list them all would take us forever to do so. But of course, is best known for running the Green Party of Canada before, and then has now currently taken back the leadership as a co-leader, and was gracious enough to spend some time with us talking about environmentalism, talking about the future of the Green Party, the past of the Green Party, rather controversially, and then what was her plans going forward as the leader. We also got into residential school denialism a little bit, and we also got into other conversations around her own history of politics and a really interesting story of you following her on the campaign trail.
Yes, and Elizabeth and I share the distinction of having both been thrown out off the grounds of a hospital in near Victoria. We were both standing outside the hospital, and we were both politely asked to leave. And then I had to do my interview with her standing on the side of a busy highway. So, she's a good egg. Any politician who will stand on the side of a busy highway and do an interview is okay in my books.
So without further ado, let's get to our feature interview with Federal Green Party leader Elizabeth May. We're very honored to have a good friend and colleague, someone who's worked for a very long period of time in some very important issues. In 2011, was voted as the first Green Party candidate to the House of Commons, representing the constituents of Saanich Gulf Islands. And in 2006, of course, just before that, 5 years before that, was elected leader of the Green Party of Canada until 2019. Has written 8 books and been an advocate for environmental issues across the country, and is now just recently returned to being a co-leader in the Green Party. Welcome to the podcast, Elizabeth May.
Thank you so much, Niigaan, and thank you, Dan. I'm really thrilled to be able to join you in a podcast.
Well, I should say, because I have the best origin story with Elizabeth, because I went out to her riding in 2011 and did a feature story on her, as she was just beginning her campaign. And in the course of following her around in one day, Elizabeth and her campaign had planned to do a little handshaking and campaigning at a local hospital. And so we all got dropped off by the vehicle down this long driveway in front of the hospital. And Elizabeth was just starting to approach people there when somebody from the hospital ran out and said, "You can't do that here," and kicked us off the property. And but it was also half a kilometer back to the road.
Yeah.
So we walked all the way back to the road, and then it was like a really busy road, and stood on the side of this 2-lane highway and did a lovely interview. So, when people talk about politicians who have poise under stress and pressure, that's the story I tell them, so.
It's as good as the story that the Maclean's reporter could have told about my waiting at the Toronto Pride Parade in the staging area for an hour and a half with my 14-year-old daughter, and I was waiting for hip replacement, so I couldn't move, and I was parked in a rickshaw among a group called Totally Naked Toronto Men. And
you can't buy advertising like that in politics,
man. The Maclean's guy said, "You're really calm for a mom stuck in this particular situation." Anyway, my daughter was not traumatized.
Oh, well, that's and you weren't traumatized by the walk or the
no
or the traffic or anything else. First of all, so the co-leadership thing, I've been meaning to ask. We both actually want to ask this question. So, was this your Al Pacino moment? You tried to get out and they just kept pulling you back in last fall?
No, not actually. I stepped down, really, speaking of my daughter, as I just was, especially because I was a single mom for virtually all her life, and I found my love of my life at age 64. So John wasn't in the picture when my daughter, who'd been my rock, and basically, you probably, in the listening audience, the scenario of a single mom with one daughter. You guys are close, right? And she was always had my back, and she was part of every decision I made, including deciding to leave being executive director of the Sierra Club of Canada to run for leader of the Green Party in 2006. She was part of every decision. And she just she'd been part of every campaign, 2006 by-election, 2008 national, 2011 national, 2015 national. And she said, "Mom, if you're going to go into the 2019 campaign again, you've got to promise me it's the last one." So I made that promise. I don't break promises. By 2019, I'm married to John, who's saying, "Don't step down, honey." And I said, "Well, I have to. I promised Kate." So it wasn't about the usual political cover story. I want to spend more time with my family. I just promised my daughter. And so I stepped down. And I had no intention of running for leader again. And people weren't trying to pull me back in, quite honestly. Some were, but it wasn't a constant thing. What happened was the awful constant reminder of the science on the climate crisis. And April 4th, 2022, that particular sixth assessment of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report was released. And to my horror, I really was horrified because I know the science really well. And I thought the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change keeps saying, well, there's this pathway could maybe hold us to below 1 point or to 1.5 degrees. This pathway over here could keep us to below 2 degrees. Those are the targets we adopted in the Paris Agreement. And they're not political targets. They're about survival or not to get too deeply into science. So suddenly on April 4th, 2022, sitting at my desk in the House of Commons, as I have been, I didn't leave Parliament. To my horror, read that the IPCC is now saying that to hold to 1.5 or 2, they'd never put them together on the same page before, global emissions must peak and begin to fall at the latest before 2025. And I read that sentence over and over again. And I started actually trying to figure out, what do I do? So not to take you through all the thought process included thinking I should leave Parliament. I'm not effective anymore in here. This is beyond emergency. All hands on deck, something different. And every time I talk to friends in the international climate movement or elsewhere, so what do I do? And not every friend agreed, but more and more people said, why are you asking us what you should do? You should run for leader of the Green Party. We need you back there. And that began to take root, but I knew I did not want to re-offer the same thing I'd been doing because it's not exactly sexism and ageism, but I could sense a Lisa LaFlamme moment would come over me of people saying, what, the older lady's back again? You couldn't find anyone else? But a lot of friends of mine in the global Greens movement, where we have over 400 elected members of parliament around the world in different countries, a lot of them operate as co-leaders. And the more I talk to friends globally, the more I realized that's what I would want. I don't want to do that same job over again. I'd like to try, and we still don't officially have the change in our constitution for co-leadership, but I didn't want to put my name forward to run for leader again for the Al Pacino moment. I wanted to be able to say, this is going to be, and it's genuinely different because Jonathan Pedneau is extraordinary. He's right now running in the by-election in NDG Westmount. He's extraordinary. And same by-election, of course, same voting time as Winnipeg South Centre and Portage Lisgar. But anyway, that was the process. And it was as unexpected for me as it was, I suppose, for public that I would be coming back. But I just need to be effective, not because I'm political, but because I'm a grandmother. And this is a moral responsibility that I can't shirk.
I mean, absolutely. I think we're gonna get to the discussion around what's affecting Manitoba and elsewhere, forest fires and climate change. These are crucial issues. Arguably, and I remember being on another show, a national show that consistently and continually, almost for 4 months, talked about the party and not in a good light, and I think has instilled or contributed to a general feeling in the public that the party, after you left, which was in a fairly healthy state, had fundraising, money in the bank, had a strong slate of candidates, probably, I think the highest amount of MPs at that time. And now the party is in a much different scenario. Since you left, there was the struggle for leadership with Anime Paul, and then, of course, the great discord amongst the leadership, the board, and so on. Yeah. We don't need to recount all of that, but arguably, you're really the only person that could have come back to support this party, to bring it back to any sort of semblance of confidence. Would you not agree?
I mean, no, I can't agree. There would have been probably other people if the party, but I mean, given the last couple of years, it's quite the case. I mean, we'd had over 1 million votes in 2019. In 2021, we had, inexplicably, and I've got to say, I still don't understand how it was allowed to happen, so many empty ridings. We had full slates since 2004, 2006, I mean, all those elections. When the party had less money and all of that, we'd always had full slates. But because of having more than 80 places where voters had no chance to vote Green, 80 ridings, we felt we came perilously close to falling below 2% of the popular vote. We would have had those votes in those ridings, but we didn't have candidates for people to vote for. So that was obviously a bad patch. We really are out of it. I think lots of people can rebuild, but there's nothing like rebuilding also again with being a team. And I am now a 69-year-old white woman of privilege, etc. My partner is a 33-year-old racialized, young, brilliant human rights activist. We come from different backgrounds. We see things, we are remarkably aligned. And I think that creates a future for us that's different than me.
So you mentioned the 2019 election, which, was a pretty remarkable performance by the Green Party. And, without going into too many of the details, and then things sort of fell apart internally. And then you also mentioned externally the allure the party had for candidates and ultimately for voters. So I've always wondered if, whether this is an example of how success is its own burden. Was the success of 2019, did it, in perhaps an ironic way, did it actually contribute to the struggles in the leader's office, the struggles with internal sense of who the Green Party was, and then ultimately, a less impressive electoral performance?
Honestly, Dan, I don't think so. I mean, if, as Niigaan was saying, when I left, we had just had the best election we'd ever had. We got over 1 million votes. We elected 3 MPs, and not just 3 MPs, breakthrough parties in this country, if you think about it, and people often don't think about it, but breakthrough parties, where did the Bloc Québécois come from? Where did Reform Party come from? Parties that started more recently than the Green Party, actually. We're now in our 40th year. So parties that are more recent always start as regional splinter parties. That's how you get your base. First past the post voting rewards parties that are regionally grounded. That's how could the Bloc Québécois, a separatist party, be Her Majesty's loyal opposition, the official opposition in Canada? Because of first past the post. But here we were in 2019 with an MP from New Brunswick, MPs from British Columbia, and still right now in Parliament, there are only 2 of us, but Mike Morris is Kitchener Centre, Ontario. I'm Saanich, Gulf Islands, British Columbia. Our appeal, and where we nearly win seats and where we come in second, is all over the place. That's a national base that in any other voting system would have a greater voice in Parliament. But what happened when I didn't think things could go sideways. I thought, this is set up for success. I've got such a good succession plan. Sometimes, and this happened, we're not the only party where this is the case. Succession planning is really hard in politics, right? So you think you're doing really well. Jack Layton and then Tom Mulcair got eliminated by his party rather rapidly. I mean, after Stephen Harper, you go to Andrew Scheer, then Aaron O'Toole, now Pierre Poilievre. Succession planning in our political system is particularly fraught. Not everybody is good at the job. The person who replaced me was, without lots of commentary, not good at the job. And that costs, and you have to rebuild. But the internal stuff, I think, got a bit, media was interested in any media leak, and there were some people who were enjoying media leaks. That's over. We are we've held on to a remarkable and a remarkably loyal membership base, candidates, a strong volunteer base, and right now we are competing in the 4 by-elections that are for Monday, the 19th of June. Doug Hemmerling, we've got in Winnipeg South Centre, Jonathan Pedno, obviously in Notre-Dame-Glace, and Nick running in, who is, of course, a wonderful candidate for the leadership for the Manitoba Greens. We're feeling very, not entirely restored because our public reputation isn't where it should be. But internally, we're getting our act together.
So I'm interested. I mean, I know that what grabs headlines in national news media is not necessarily indicative of the, the tenor or the substance of public opinion, but it certainly does seem like extremists on the right side of the political spectrum are sucking a lot of oxygen out of the political debate right now in the country. The leader of the Conservative Party is just definitely taking his party farther to the right, and then you have the People's Party, and which is kind of, I liken that to kind of the like, don't blame me if I write about Maxime Bernier. It's a car wreck. Who doesn't like a car wreck? You got to write about it. But even so, it's made me wonder what impact the rise in volume of extreme right-wing political rhetoric in this country, does that have an impact on the progressive elements in the discussion, particularly the Green Party? Does that make, do you think it'll make more people want to consider Green, or does it drive people back to safe centrist options?
I guess I know this may sound too high-minded to be real, but my larger concern in the Green Party is Canadian democracy and democracies around the world right now, because fascism is on the rise. One of the things that is destructive of democracy, which is why Vladimir Putin does it, is the use of social media to foment what we now call rage farming. Good heavens. So I'm more concerned that Canada as a whole is still fragmented and more fractured and more polarized post-COVID than pre-COVID. I don't want to feel like I don't recognize my own country. So one of the hallmarks of being Canadian that I've always loved is that we always say we can disagree without being disagreeable. And that's the case for sure in how the Greens look at things, because around the world as well, where we make headway, and we're now in 11 governments around the world at the moment where we serve on federal cabinets with prime ministers of other colors, but we are very committed to cross-party cooperation, and we're also very committed to healing a society that's fractured. So it is concerning that there's a rise in what we could call populism, although I associate populism as well with Tommy Douglas, and the two don't fit together in my mind. But there's a deliberate fracturing for purposes of driving the algorithms to drive the kind of politics that is destructive of our mutual respect and shared caring for each other. And I think a return and a rise of the Green Party as what I hope are at least the grown-ups in the room to say, no, come on, don't use language that divides. Don't be calling people out and saying this group of people is, and then you attach a label to it. Let's calm down and listen to each other and figure out where our commonality is, because fundamentally, as Canadians, we mentioned briefly already in the show, the wildfires, we got to take care of each other. We got to be paying attention to oncoming, increasingly dangerous climate events that require of us that we pull together and take care of each other on the ground in neighborhoods, communities, and nationally and in Parliament. So I'm hoping that kind of conversation can happen. It's alarming when people get pulled into kind of rabbit holes of extremism online that take people to places where they're no longer part of a healthy society, but undermining it. And there's no point demonizing those people. We have to figure out, how do we talk to each other? How do we pull each other back from a brink and act like the kind of Canadian family we really are?
I think it's interesting that you're talking about acting like adults. I had a debate with my sisters the other day because, as usual, there's this huge explosion of residential school denialism that's consistently and continually attacking myself and my father because we write very simple. We write very simple pieces or state very simply, believe survivors. Listen to Indigenous communities, and most importantly, let's support communities that are searching for their children, that are searching these unmarked graves or these potential sites in their community. Let's get a fuller story of residential schools. We will be all better off as a result. But the debate with my sisters was, I choose to ignore this vitriol that I get from the former Justice Minister of Manitoba, who's just an ardent residential school denialist. But I don't choose to engage. And her position is that you have to engage these sides of the political spectrum because ignoring them is not working. I think a similar thing around climate change a similar debate would take place. We have a very strong amount of people in the country who don't see forest fires, floods in Manitoba, hurricanes, and tornadoes that are happening in areas that have never happened before as related somehow to the issue of climate change, and that we can still continue to burn fossil fuels and build as many pipelines as possible and build dams all across Manitoba until the water is almost at a standstill. I mean, if we just are a few miles where Dan and I are sitting from Lake Winnipeg, where there is an overalgae bloom every single season because of the dams that we use to enjoy electricity in Winnipeg. It's a very simple equation, but yet people want to deny that this is the facts. How do you continually and consistently for decades now engage people who just refuse to outright believe, and some of them are provincial premiers?
Yeah. Well, first of all, it breaks my heart to imagine. I mean, even the phrase residential school denialism is just like a stabs through the heart. You think, how would that be? But what we have in our society right now, for the first time ever, is a breakdown in what we would say as lawyers going into a court case. I used to practice law. Let's have the shared agreement on the facts. You go into a case, you've already said, okay, we can set this aside. We don't have to litigate this, and this, because we have a common understanding those are the things that happened. We used to have that. It wasn't that long ago that every Canadians generally would supper time news, or before you go to bed, you'd watch Knowlton Nash in the news. Nobody said Knowlton Nash represents some sort of dangerous provocateur that's arguing only a government case. I mean, so the attack on CBC, the attack on our institutions, we now really are in a place where a lot of Canadians can look at the same things happening, but the news sources, some of them aren't news sources, some of them are propaganda sources. I think for me, what really matters is that we constantly keep the lines of communication open. So I work really hard at trying to find where's the place where I start a conversation with friends of mine who are conservative members of parliament. Number one, it's important to be able to say and mean it. Friends of mine who are conservative politicians. When I come up against something where people, I think I'm with your sisters, you have to call it out and say, no, Jim McCrae, this really happened. If you think it didn't happen, let's unpack why you think that. And I don't want to yell at you about it, but this is what happened. And if we try to pretend away the genocide of our history, how do we ever move forward? So unpacking it and trying to approach people who don't agree with us with a really big dose of compassion. So on the climate front, I continually work on friends in the Conservative caucus to make sure, and it is the case, that many, many more Conservatives understand the climate crisis than talk about it publicly. And the more it hits their individual ridings, the more that I'm of fellow MPs in British Columbia who went through losing hundreds of people in a couple of days to the heat dome and all the wildfires, and then a few months later, the atmospheric rivers that took out major highways and did massive damage and killed people. I mean, people, I don't know how many of you in Manitoba know about this, but when we talk about farms lost in British Columbia because of the floods, friends of my husband and mine, my husband for many years it was his mother's farm is in interior BC, quite near Lytton, a little town called Ashcroft. Family, friends who lost their farm, the river charted a new course. They had a 7-acre farm before the floods. and they have a 4-acre farm. 3 acres of land fell out and went into the river. People in Lytton are still paying the mortgage to the banks on homes they don't have because they burnt to the ground. They are still paying the mortgage so they can eventually rebuild a house there. The damage of all of this has changed a number of my conservative colleagues in Parliament. So again, it's steady conversation. And I'll just bookmark this because it's too long a conversation to fit in this podcast. But a brilliant Canadian scientist named Dr. Catherine Hayhoe, who actually teaches climate science in Texas, and her husband is an evangelical preacher in Texas. So talk about your missionary work, reaching out to people who don't necessarily see the light. She works in a community that's really staunchly a pro fossil fuel community, and she's constantly. Her book is called Saving Us, and she talks about how you talk to people. You don't start with throwing statistics at them. You don't start with, I'll never agree with you because you're just wrong. You start with, did you always enjoy fishing? Is it different now from what it was like when you were a kid? You start gentle. You start with something we can both agree on. Do you want to agree with me that God created the world? Do you agree with me that then creation's kind of important? Depending on who you're talking to, where you are, how you fit. There's always a way, as hard as it sounds, if you can reduce the volume and listen for a while, generally you can find something in common. And that's the horror of algorithms and social media and our split-second temper, right? Somebody says something we don't like it. Okay, I'm right and you're an idiot. That's actually the name of a book. I'm right and you're an idiot. This is not a good way to have public discourse, and listening and turning down the volume is pretty important.
Yeah, I mean, I guess this would be a kind of macro micro discussion as well, because I think there's a balance to strike, because there are people who just simply will argue gravity doesn't exist, and you can be exhausting to be the person who's engaging and trying to argue that simple, basic science, like you just have to watch you can hold as many stones up and drop them to say, see, gravity exists. And I guess what you're saying is that, strategy is important, but it's also a very heavy burden on those of us who have other better things to do than to work with people who just simply are starting with the premise, which is that you're fake news, that you have nothing meritorious to say, and that I've been taught that you're the enemy. And I think that's generally how Indigenous peoples are still portrayed in the country. When you see ministers who say things like, red tape, and it's really talking about treaty rights, and
I would absolutely say, okay, this is so wrong for Indigenous people to have the burden of convincing settler culture people who want to believe fairy tales. That's mostly our job as settler culture people. I mean, the Jim McRae's of this world. Let's just talk sensibly. What do we know about why the residential schools were established? What do we know from historical evidence? What do we know from there's so many examples of what is clear and incontrovertible. So starting with the incontrovertible stuff, it leads you to a place of being able to talk about what happened when Indigenous kids in schools were put in the same rooms, TB infected kids with healthy kids, and that they knew that was happening at the time and refused to act on it. What does it tell you when we have firsthand accounts? I mean, obviously over and over again, but the burden should never be on Indigenous people to convince I hate to use the word denier because you fall right into Holocaust denialism, but it's very similar. It's unpleasant, so you want to believe it could not possibly have happened because it's too horrible to contemplate. It happened. The Holocaust happened. A cultural and actual genocide happened. A deliberate attempt, in the words of the people who are the architects of the system, to take the Indian out of the child. It's not like you can deny that. And it didn't stop with residential schools. I don't need to tell you, but I'm pretty. I mean, the '60s scoop stuff and our current day society of how many people are in solitary confinement in our prisons, mostly Indigenous people. Well, why would that be, do we think? Right? Well, this has to be called out.
Yeah, the real issue is, could you use that argument for a climate change argument, saying some basic premises? Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, I was just going to say, well, first of all, like, I'm right and you're an idiot. You indicated that, we can't have discourse like that. And now I have to rethink my entire social media policy, because that's essentially the only way I approach people on social media.
The author of that book, so I'm not plagiarizing, is James Hogan. And it's a really good book. And it's all about how we actually don't have conversation, because no conversation starts with "I'm right and you're an idiot."
No.
That's
I'm trying to be better every day, so that I'll start with that tomorrow. But no, I think the thing that I'm sort of concerned about, and I'm certainly not flagging anything that's new, but in the political discourse, like, we really haven't made a lot of progress in the last decade in discussing climate change as an existential threat, but more importantly, how that translates into public policy. So, you have conservative premiers across the country who won't even say the words climate change. You have a federal conservative leader that wants to weaponize, the carbon tax.
Yeah.
And essentially, if I understand his argument correctly, it's expensive and it's ineffective because it's not big enough. I don't know. But in essence, we get, like, everybody saying, there's a fire and we need to put water on it, but we really don't like the design of your buckets, so we can't. So, like, short of "you're an idiot" and "stop, you're killing me," how do we get closer to the same page in the political discourse?
Well, I mean, you called out Daniel Smith for not being able to talk about climate change in the middle of the province being on fire. Yeah, but neither could Rachel Notley.
Right. Right.
And then where does the media go in that election? You've got Rachel Notley and Daniel Smith both studiously ignoring the reasons that the province is on fire. And you've got, the third party in the polling now, way down. You've got the two at the very top duking it out in a two-party race. But the party polling third, the Green Party of Alberta, actually has a leader who is a firefighter, who was actually speaking truth to fire, and uninterrupted. The media didn't say, "Isn't this interesting?" The national media also, if you watch the CBC stories on, landslides that are currently happening in Rwanda, and so many people have died because of climate change. But when they covered the fires in Alberta, they didn't want to mention climate change either.
No.
And in Parliament, you mentioned climate change. You give saying, "Ma, you're politicizing the fires." No, I'm sorry. The fires are occurring because for the last 3 decades, successive governments have been kicking it down the road to get past their electoral cycle, and they won't have to have accountability for the targets they picked. This goes to Stephen Harper. This goes, as well as it goes to Jean Chrétien, as well as it goes to Justin Trudeau. But it's not the political party brand that you want to demonize as much as what kind of system do we have that's incapable of not only thinking about future generations to the 7th generation, as in, in Indigenous teachings of the Iroquois Confederacy. No, we can't even think about our own kids through their normal lifespan. This is so. The closer the climate crisis gets to being personal and immediate, which is happening now, the less likely it is that the obfuscation can continue, because the vast majority of Canadians, in the order of 80%, have understood for decades that burning fossil fuels is creating, climate change on steroids, weather on steroids, however you want to look at it. We are responsible for loading fuel on the fire of what our kids are going to have to experience. And we're running out of time to make sure our kids can experience it while being able to adapt. In my head, what I really want to know is that when my daughter, who's now 32, is my age, and there's something going on, she can pick up a phone, call 911 or whatever they have in those days, but that there'll be a structure of our society that can take care of each other, because that's what's at risk. It's not an environmental threat; it's a security threat.
I think and Niigaan and I have talked on this, in other episodes, but I was kind of shocked at the amount of attention that what I consider to be legitimate news organizations spent trying to explain the connection between climate change and the wildfires. And, I looked up, there was a BBC story. I'm a big fan of the BBC, as a news organization. Did climate change cause Canada's wildfires? And really, this is a paragraph in a story. It's not a whole story.
No.
Wildfires are naturally occurring phenomena. They are bigger. They cover more land and more numerous because of climate change. And I'm not. So when I weep for the state of political discourse, I'm weeping as well, in part for the state of modern journalism. If we really, I don't know, do we actually have to keep it? Maybe we do have to keep explaining that.
And if you compare Canadian coverage of fires with Australian coverage or other countries, no question, our news media has not recovered from the Harper era yet. There's a couple of different factors, of course, the rise of social media, mainstream journalism, the loss of major papers. I mean, you can go back and look at it. So journalism has a whole bunch of factors that are making it harder to actually cover the news. But we're also a country that self-censors one hell of a lot. When John Baird was Minister of Environment, so 2006, 2007, you had an edict from the minister's office that Environment Canada scientists weren't allowed to talk to media anymore. Well, guess what? Since Trudeau came in 2015, the Environment Canada scientists are mostly gone, and those guys didn't hire any back. So you still have a situation where, and reporters do tend to self-censor. And it isn't that, it is easy to find people who will explain it to you, and I don't mean to you, Dan, to you again, but
explain away.
Journalism in this country is rather a big factor in the problem of how we get people to be able to face the reality of the climate crisis without despair and with the kind of mobilized public outrage that says, God, hello, you guys. You can't, Justin Trudeau, claim to be a climate leader and buy a pipeline and spend $30 billion of our money to build it. Hello. And you can't, Pierre Poilievre, pretend. The other day he gave a 4-hour speech. The only time he uses the word fire is when he wants to fire David Johnston. I mean, there's a disconnect to reality that you think, God, guys, the public is way, way, way ahead of you here. So it needs explaining because, for one reason, the worse the climate crisis gets, and I go right down to the nitty-gritty community reality. Every community that goes through a serious climate event, whether it's a flood, Hurricane Fiona, a fire, big windstorm, several things happen all at once. Generally, you lose power, you lose your landlines, and you lose your cell phone coverage. This country is woefully at the basic level of how do you save people in community. We're quite unprepared for what we need to do. So that should be a reason to mobilize and bring people together at a community level. One part of my riding, by the way, it's just phenomenal. Salt Spring Island is 10,000 people, but it has every single part of the community mapped and connected for people to take care of their neighbors, and with ham radio operators working as volunteers prepared to tell people. Like when the people had to leave Lytton on July 1st, 2021, they drove out of town not knowing if they were driving into a fire or away from a fire because they had no information. So there's that level of how we have to mobilize now and where we put our resources. And we have to make sure that we stop being, as a country, one of the worst polluters on earth. And we have this fairy tale that a lot of people are prepared to believe, and Justin Trudeau says it all the time, that we're climate leaders. No, we aren't. We have the worst record of any G7 country. But, we're lovely people, mostly. We're good people, but that doesn't mean we have a good climate record. The media could help us so much if it would have, the example I just used, if during the election campaign in Alberta, anyone at the national media had decided, let's put a microphone in front of Jordan Wilkie, leader of the Green Party of Alberta, articulate, brilliant firefighter, and find out what he has to say.
We got time for one more question here, and I don't want to end on hopelessness. So maybe I'm assuming in your optimistic glass half full way of seeing that you'll turn this around. But we're in the midst yesterday, not so much today, but yesterday, Winnipeg was engulfed in smoke. And like most Canadian cities over the past few weeks, particularly on the East Coast in Alberta, I mean, we're spreading all the way to New York, and on the cover of newspapers in New York saying Canada's to blame for these smoke in New York, which is absolutely insane and makes no sense at all. You'd think that would mobilize. You'd think that you're talking about mobilization. I mean, so many First Nations communities are mobilized to address political issues because of crises. Like you'll often see this with the lack of a winter road. The entire community, people will die, and then the entire community will get behind forcing the government, doing sit-ins, doing major political mobilization, letter writing campaigns, doing marches all the way to downtown in the city here to demand a winter road. As just one example, and you see that also with demanding ring dikes for communities and so on and so forth. You would think that all of these things that are happening would mobilize people, but yet people are willing to believe what you said to be rage farming or fake news or whatever else we want to call it in social media worlds or in media worlds too, mainstream media world. What will it take, or what do you think is the tipping point for people to mobilize on the issue of climate change? And I would like to believe that it's do the right thing, as you said, or reasoned arguments. That doesn't seem to be working, though.
Well, I think people are mobilized. I mean, the awareness level and the connection. I mean, a lot of people who would have a year ago, even colleagues in Parliament said, "Oh, poo-poo, that's not climate change." They don't say it anymore. The MPs whose areas were hit with Hurricane Fiona are different people than what they were before Hurricane Fiona. The people, and the worst part of what I'm going to say, which is from the briefings that we've gotten from the Minister for Emergency Preparedness, Bill Blair, the best science Canada has at the national level, and this is in briefings shared with all party leaders. I mean, this is a Zoom meeting. Pierre Poilievre's in the room. This isn't going to get any better for the rest of this summer. It's going to be hot and dry, and on top of where we are right now and what you're experiencing, what we're experiencing in BC, 8 Canadian provinces and the Northwest Territories have fires, and the rest of the summer doesn't get better. So I think this is going to be a moment of awareness, of shifting, because we have time to save ourselves, but not much. And I do, again, to the hopeful part, hear the first part of what I said. We have time to save ourselves. And we have time as Canadians to be, and for Canada to play what we used to be. We were on the ozone protocol. We saved the ozone layer. That saved life on Earth. That's not an exaggeration. We can be the kind of country that steps up, Lester B. Pearson won the Nobel Peace Prize for creating peacekeepers. We can be saviors. We can be the people we were waiting for, but only if we get past the paralysis that comes from understanding enough science to know that we're in desperate trouble and then tuning out because it's too scary. We have to say, we actually can do this. We have to actually stop building the Trans Mountain Pipeline at a cost of $30 billion. Let's take all that Crown Corporation we've just created and get all that heavy moving equipment that we've bought and all those great guys that are doing the work and say, okay, now you're building fire breaks. Now we're going to take the places that are really vulnerable to atmospheric rivers. We're going to put in culverts before we lose the roads. We're going to build out. We're going to get resilience as a job creator. Number one, there's nothing like resilience and building in energy efficiency and creating a grid that works east-west. We've got grids that work like Manitoba Hydro sells to the United States. Manitoba Hydro can't sell to Ontario. Manitoba Hydro we've really got to build out like a country and think like a country and not just save ourselves, but concentrate on what do we do as one group of humans in a family of humans that have to think like earthlings. What are we if not earthlings? So we've got to actually, I think it's a hopeful message that the values that take us to doom really come down to selfish individualism. The approach that, and again, indigenizing our culture and our society, going back to wishing we had more heroes like Dr. Peter Bryce who are recognized and fewer people who ignored the crisis as it was happening of kids. I mean, Dr. Peter Bryce, for listeners who don't know the name, I mean, a real hero in advocating a long time ago that we had to pay attention to what was happening to Indigenous children who'd been taken away from their families. But we do have Canadian heroes we can focus on, and we have a good story in the midst of horrors. We have to be the people who came to save ourselves, which means we have to speak truth to power. We have to also say, as citizens in a democracy, this is not the time to tune out. The news may be bad. Don't turn it off. Get yourself involved in changing what you hear on the news so that we're actually telling the story of how we as a country became 100% renewable energy and did it while improving our economic situation. We have to stop listening to the lies of the people who make billions out of sacrificing our children's very future. Why do we listen to billionaire liars anymore? They kind of have a track record, So let's not listen to them anymore.
Okay, so I'm assuming that was a rhetorical question. So it's always that's always a good way to end the podcast on a provocative rhetorical question. Elizabeth May, you've been a really good egg agreeing to do this chat, which clearly we could go on forever. We could always go on forever, and the podcast universe allows us to do that. But we should probably wrap up now by saying thank you. I know the people who are working on the by-election campaigns in Manitoba would like to thank you for taking the time out to visit Manitoba recently. I'm sorry we didn't get to do this in person.
Me
but
too.
We'll
and a
be,
shout out to Nick Gaddart, because I know I just said Nick before. Nick and Doug, God love you.
Well, we'll all be watching next week's results, and in the lead, because you're going to be around whenever the next federal election takes place. You will be a candidate in that election, I understand.
No doubt about it. And and now that I'm all married up and I've got John Kidder just says, you go, honey, don't stop. I'm young. I'm only 69. I got years on me. Do any of your guests end the show by saying "Hi ho, Silver"? I know, probably not.
Well, first of all, it's high. As we learned through painful experience, it's hi yo.
Oh, sorry.
So, no. I made the same mistake and was thrashed by the Lone Ranger aficionados in our midst. But if if you want to do a hi yo, go for it.
I just wanted to say, who was that masked man? I wanted to thank him.
That's
a COVID joke.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for being on the podcast, and like I said, it's just a real honor to spend this time with you. And you've been in the trenches for such a long time. I think a lot of people can learn from the patience and the strategies that you have to deal with, I think, one of the most pressing issues of our time. So, miigwech to you.
Miigwech, chimagwech, and God bless you.
All right. Well, that's our feature interview with Elizabeth May. Really fascinating time that we spent with her, and she was so generous. That could have went on for quite a long time.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the fortunate parts about doing the podcast is like we haven't interviewed a lot of uninteresting people, and we almost always conclude that we could go much longer than we actually do, which is kind of means, we're having a good time. And one quick editorial note. So that interview took place just shortly before the federal by-elections on June the 19th. And Elizabeth mentioned her co-leader, well, technically deputy leader, but co-leader, Jonathan Pedno, who ran in Notre Dame de Grace Westmount and did not win that election, that by-election. So there's probably going to be a little bit of hard decision-making now about what to do about the co-leadership that she entered into, Elizabeth May and her deputy leader. So, but there should be a federal election, probably 18 months, sometime within the next 18 months.
Soon enough, anyways. And I mean, of course, the other update out of that is Maxime Bernier did not win his attempt in Portage Liscar. Brandon Leslie from the Conservatives held that rather handily, but Maxime Bernier did get 17% in the vote, and that's notable. Also, Ben Carr won in the Winnipeg South Centre riding rather expectedly, but following in his father's footsteps. And I sent a text message over to Ben. I've known him since he was a student of mine over there in Kelvin High School back in the day. And I said, congratulations. And I think he's very excited to be able to take up that mantle. But without further ado, I don't know if someone's aware, but this podcast is being uploaded slightly later this week because Dan and I, amongst our colleagues, a full force at the Winnipeg Free Press, have been enveloped in this 24-hour project, which has studied sort of a day in the life of Winnipeg's downtown. I got 3 to 4 in the morning, and I covered Air Canada Park, and I understand you covered from midnight to 1 a.m.
Well, 1 a.m. to 2 a.m. I rode. I did a tour of duty, part tour of duty with a deputy paramedic chief in the downtown core, watching the Winnipeg Fire and Paramedic Service in action, attending to the needs of people in that area. And mine was pretty fascinating. Yours? Yeah.
Oh, I mean, it was, I expected it to be fascinating. I expected it to be very interesting, but I sat in a circle in an encampment from 4 to 5 a.m. At Air Canada Park, which is in downtown. And I had photographer John Woods with me, and I had members of the Downtown Community Safety Partnership, which we've talked about in the past of the pod. Really interesting hour. And so if you get a chance, everybody who's fans of the Free Press, keep your eye out for 49.8, which is our weekend feature, which will be the coverage of our 24-hour story covering the Winnipeg's downtown. It's forthcoming in the Free Press. And big thanks to everybody at CJNU for continuing to commit and produce this. Our producer, Adam. Thanks to everybody at the Free Press, Paul Simin, editor, Wendy Sawatsky.
Wanda is going to be very upset that she got drawn into the podcast production.
Who, of course, does great work uploading. This may actually never be uploaded now.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, she has the power to spike this baby. So,
but big thanks to everybody, of course, and thanks to everybody for listening this week.